In the early 80s through to the early 90s, the government sat down and started to craft these federal regulations so that in 1991 we, the common rule, which has 4 subparts, subpart A, which is human subjects, B, which is fetuses, pregnant women, and human in vitro fertilization, C, which is prisoners, and D, which is children. They crafted the common rule for which every study we look at, generally speaking, has one of those subparts reviewed for making sure that the project is safe going forward. And then, of course, the FDA have their set of regulations, 21 CFR 50 and 56, and they obviously deal with biologics, drugs, and devices. And recently, the FDA have created an exception to the informed consent, and that is to do with emergency research. For example, research where you're out in the field and you're at the football game and your dearly beloved uncle starts to have a cardiac arrest and there's a brand new device. It's no time for him to get to the emergency room and then have that new device implemented. It is able to be implemented at that time, but you can't get consent. Or another example would be a pediatric patient having a seizure, looking at a drug that might prevent that seizure. Those circumstances, the regulations with the FDA would have to be followed. What is an IRB? It's an institutional review board. It's an ethical review board. We do look at the scientific relevance of the study. It's not our prime focus. Our prime focus is the ethics. We are mandated by the government. We have a minimum of 5 members, which means one of them has to be a community member. We have non-scientists. We have scientists. We provide oversight of human subjects research regardless of the funding. At the U of M we have 9, and in my world I take care of the 5 biomedical, and recently I took on a 6th one where the National Cancer Institute have a central IRB, and what we've done is essentially cede our normal review of the project to that particular IRB, but apply only local context rules when the investigator wants to do the study here. It's a little complicated, but it's a new IRB relationship that we've now gone into. I should tell you that we are an independent group. It could be that Mary Sue Coleman says to me tomorrow, I want you to approve my nephew's project because it's the best research I can possibly think to be done here at the U of M. And if we do not feel it is, we can say no. We are not governed or ruled by anybody. We are federally mandated. That means we are an independent body to make these decisions. Our mission is to protect the welfare and rights of human subjects. It's our overriding goal every day. But we also have a mission to enhance the scientific endeavors here at the University of Michigan and to make sure that the research that is conducted by the researcher is safe and, basically takes into concern the rights and welfare of the human subject. And we want to do that in an effective and an efficient manner. Our stakeholders are obviously the research subject, the institution for which you are a part of. Sponsors, that could be pharmaceutical, that could be a private foundation. Oversight agencies, our friendly FDA, Office of Human Research Protection, OHRP, there's a common acronym and you'll hear me talk later on about, or use rather. Office of Research Integrity would be another group. And basically society. We are provided dollars to conduct research, and they are the beneficiaries of the knowledge from that research. So we do have an obligation to talk to our society and hear what they have to say. All right, so here's my little office down at the very bottom. And IRBMED proper is the 5 IRB boards. I have a functional report to the medical school and a functional report to the Office of the Vice President, institutional official, and for those of you who don't know who that is, that's Stephen Forrest. And then we have obviously a reportability back up to the FDA. Now, if any of you, and I don't mean you to look on your computers and look them all up, but if any of you know these acronyms, and you can see me at the end of the lecture, I have a little prize for you. All right, so our current IRBMED statistics are as follows. We look at about 3,000 active projects per year. We review about 6,500 applications, and by that I mean if you have a project, you have amendments, adverse events, that could constitute 5 different applications related to that one project. We have about 1,000 new projects each year, and we have about 90 board members and a little under 26 staff. Right, what do these regulations require of researchers? First and foremost, we ask you to follow the Belmont principles. We want you to submit human subject projects to an IRB for review and ongoing approval. We're not in a setting to give you forgiveness over not getting permission, and that is something that often investigators come to me and say, I didn't realize I needed to submit a protocol. Well, the regulations are such, and the institution requires you to know what the rules are when conducting research. And then you're also to follow any other applicable regulations. And I look at that and I laugh, because quite frankly there are new regulations every day for which even my office can't keep track of. So it's a hard one to follow if you're a researcher. All right, what do researchers need to tell the IRB? Okay, apply for the IRB before conducting research involving human subjects. And here are the two requirements. On the left, 45 CFR 46 again goes to the OHRP, Office of Human Research Protection regulations, and then on the right, 21 CFR 56 goes to the FDA regulations. I'm not interested in animals. That was the first lecture. A human subject is a living individual about whom an investigator conducting research obtains data through intervention or interaction with the individual or identifiable private information. I can't tell you how many times I tell people this, because it's not, I get information, well, what if I'm going back to look at a whole bunch of dead patients' information? It's not a human subject, it's not living. So this is the first principle about human subjects research, for which I hope you can take home today. Second, research is a systematic investigation including research development, testing, and evaluation designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. Generalizable knowledge means publishing generally. You want to get your message out. Now, getting a message out could be institutional. It could just be that you want to know about it here in the U of M, what has been done. But the minute you start talking about it outside of the U of M, you start putting it in journals, you put it on a website, that's producing generalizable knowledge that's being published. A systematic investigation. I might have a surgeon who one day says doing an isolated limb perfusion, which is where they cut off the circulation to a limb and then they infuse chemotherapy, says to himself, wow, I think an inner tube of a bike would be a great way to use a tourniquet. I'm going to take that inner tube and I'm going to sterilize it and I'm going to wrap it around the leg and I'm going to use that as the tourniquet for the day. That's not systematic. He did it once. Now, if he says, you know what, I'm going to flip a coin in the OR every day when I have these isolated limb perfusions, and I'm going to either go with the regular tourniquet, like a big giant blood pressure cuff, and pump it up, or I'm going to go with that sterilized bike inner tube. Then he's beginning to develop a protocol. He's beginning to develop something that we would look upon as a systematic investigation, so he can weigh out which one was the most effective. What a researcher needs to consider is, who are the potential subjects? What risk will they take? What will make the research scientifically worthy of those risks? Is it sufficiently funded to reach its goals? Now, we live in a world where funding is very difficult and becoming more and more competitive. It's not a prime focus of the IRB to say, well, we don't think you're fully funded, because there are other options to get funding within your own department and so forth and so on. But we look at it, because if they're trying to do something that is inherently impossible to do, given the money they've been given, or at least they think they're going to get, then we would say, you know, you need to rethink the design of the study. What is the justification for changing the medical care? Every day there are standard operating procedures or standard of care that subjects, or patients I should say, receive. When you do a study and you become a subject, first and foremost you want to start off with doing standard of care procedures within it, and then add the experimental component. And then who's responsible for what? What is the backup plan if something goes wrong or they need to contact someone? Do your potential subjects include vulnerable subjects? And here are the subparts B, C, and D that I showed you earlier: prisoners, fetuses, women, pregnant women, and children. And then also you have to consider these other issues: future pregnancies, disability affecting autonomy, things like that. All right, what will be done to minimize the risks psychologically and medically, socially, financially? Who besides the researchers are providing oversight? Is there a data safety monitoring board? These are individual boards that are charged with taking adverse events and information from the study and making decisions about whether you should continue to conduct that research. And in many cases, the IRB will require them if they haven't already been engaged before the project was submitted to the IRB. Apply before implementing changes. A lot of investigators think, wow, I got IRB approval, now I can go and I don't need to ever get back to them ever again. That's not true. We need to know when things change. You might all of a sudden realize the $25 incentive that you've advertised for isn't enough. We need to know if you increase it to $55. That's a big deal. It might not seem a big deal, but for many people, $25 to $30 increases in compensation is quite a lot of money. And then I'm not going to go through all of these different ones, but you'll see the flavor of what I'm trying to get at. All right, apply for IRB approval before implementing changes except when safety precautions are necessary to eliminate apparent immediate hazards to the subjects. What that means is if you have to do something really quickly, that's the forgiveness time. That's when we'll come back after you've told us the next day and we'll say, you know what, we understand you had to make a quick change in care or you had to implement something that we hadn't had time to deliberate at the next meeting. It's okay. All right, report progress with renewal applications. We ask for a scheduled continuation report, which is not very interesting to you right now, but essentially an annual update. We always have expectation of knowing what the adverse events were and unexpected and expected adverse events. And then any new information. For example, if you've got a sponsored drug study and all of a sudden we were given the investigator's brochure in the beginning and now they've developed or they've determined through data from other sites that the study should stop, that's the kind of report we need pretty quickly. Unanticipated problems, I'm not going to get too much into that. It's a fairly new regulation that really requires investigators to have a crystal ball because there are a lot of what you would call unanticipated problems, but if you have for example, if you have a psychiatric study and you're giving them a drug that may or may not impair their ability to walk across the road, being hit by a car would not be considered an unanticipated problem. It's quite likely that they might be hit by a car if they're impaired. And again, protocol and consent deviations. I'll get further into that last bullet point in a few minutes. All right, so we have studies that need to come to the IRB for approval. Then we have studies that are exempt. And exempt does not mean you don't come to the IRB. It means you come to the IRB and say you fit one of these 5 different categories, and you'll only note 4, I'm sure, but in one of those, the educational projects, there's 2 subparts of the exempt regulation. What that means is that the IRB office review it. If you match that exemption category, boom, you're out of there. You don't need to go back to the board. You don't need to do anything further other than to tell us on an annual basis what you're doing. But as the bottom bullet point tells you, you do need to come to us. And then the other side of it tells you examples of non-regulated research. Now, I gave you one earlier, which was research on dead persons' data. That would be non-regulated. Here is an example with respect to de-identified data from another institution. But at the same time, even though it's not regulated, we are finding more and more journals require an IRB letter from us to you saying it wasn't regulated. Now, we see that as IRB creep, and we tried to push back on it. But quite frankly, if the journals are requiring it, then we will send you a letter saying simply we don't need to see it, and that's pretty much what it is. But if that non-regulated rule, if it was human embryonic stem cells, guess what? You have to come to us. Now, and this is why it's so hard for many of you who are going to eventually do research projects to really navigate this minefield of regulations and when you're supposed to go to the IRB and when you're not and when you can and when you can't. It's just very difficult. So my only advice is to contact us and then go forward rather than not and then find yourself in a whole heap of trouble. All right. Again, don't wait for us to tell you about problems in your research project, because if you don't, we will conduct an investigation. we'll find possibly serious and/or continuing non-compliance that may or may not be reported out to those little friendly agencies, the FDA, OHRP, Department of Justice, and the Office of Inspector General. We may or may not temporarily halt or permanently halt your research project. And that doesn't mean that one project, any others you had going or would wish to conduct going down the road. And then remediation and education can take years to complete. What is non-compliance? It's a failure of a person or organization to act in accordance with the requirements of a law, regulation, policy, or the requirements and/or determinations of an IRB. That's a huge group of people that you have to make sure you're doing the right thing for. Applies to anyone, investigators, study coordinators, data managers, staff, even my IRB members and myself as well as my office. If we don't do the right thing, we have the same issues. Serious and continuing. All right, non-compliance is serious when it materially increases risk or causes substantive harm to research subjects or materially compromises the rights or welfare of a participant. Okay, the first one, it materially increases risk or causes substantive harm to the research subject. We had a study, we had an investigator, a very well-renowned investigator, decide that even though exclusion criteria was to rule out cardiac heart disease for a studied drug that has received a lot of media lately for another condition, he ignored it and he enrolled patients who did have cardiac disease, and guess what? They had adverse events. Guess what? We suspended his activity. He is no longer allowed to participate in research at the University of Michigan because he materially put subjects at risk. Now, flip that to materially compromises the rights or welfare of a participant. That's pretty easy if you never give them an informed consent. That would be where if you did research without an informed consent, we would hit that as being serious for that particular part of the definition. Now think of it another way. What if you did a study that was so poorly performed, meaning you had a protocol but you were all over the place, and one day you decided to do blood draws on this day and the next day you decided to do an EKG, and the data was so bad that you couldn't possibly construct a story for which anyone would want to know about, then you have materially compromised the rights and welfare of participants, because everybody who did that study, it was a waste of their time because the data can't create generalizable knowledge. So that would be 3 examples of serious non-compliance. And again, here are some more up here. Research performed without IRB approval. We have that. We have studies where physicians have gone in and flipped the coin and conducted research on pediatric populations without any informed consent. Exempt research not reviewed by the IRB. That would be constituting serious, believe it or not. All right, continuing is a pattern of actions or omissions that suggest a likelihood that instances of non-compliance will reoccur without intervention, or a failure to comply with a directive from an IRB to resolve an episode of compliance. Okay, the first or. The first or is if we've told them at scheduled continuation, you must come back in 1 year's time and tell us again about your project, and we keep reminding him, or he hasn't submitted an Oreo, which is it's not a cookie, it is a report of an activity that falls out of what should have happened. Essentially, they've blown us off. That it would be what we would construe as continuing non-compliance. And then again, the second or could be the same issue. There are some nuances, but I'm not going to go into too much detail about them. But here are some examples. Again, refusal to comply with an IRB request, repeated consent form signed but not dated. But in essence, a non-compliance from a continuing standpoint is just generally the PI study team just don't get it. They are going to keep making the same mistakes over and over again unless we halt that activity. Here are some FDA most commonly noted deficiencies. I've already covered a lot of them, but they really look at the patient consent, they look at the protocol, they see if you've got adequate drug accountability, if you fail to comply with your local IRB directives, even if you fail to list all the sub-investigators, which seems like such a paperwork, administrative type thing, but it's really not. We need to know who are involved with the actual research, and they do too. All right, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but Here's what happens if you don't do something right. It generally comes into the office. I have 1.5 people who do nothing more each day than go into non-compliance at U of M for those folks who deal with the biomedical IRBs. If it's major, we take it to the board chairs. They do a fact-finding investigation. It goes up to the office of vice president. And then if the board decides it needs to go out, Judy Noack's group and Steve Forrest's group, they can't say no. It's mandated. We have to report out. Again, we're sort of an island. We don't have to be regulated by our own institutional officials. Okay. Just the main point here to take home is that the outside agencies may be informed and kept apprised of an ongoing investigation. One example would be that we had an investigator in 2001 who had put participants on a study without informed consent. He went through a very lengthy sanction period where he could not do and perform any research at all. In 2007, the FDA finally get to his case, and now he's back with the clock started again from their perspective of not being able to do certain things. It can be an ongoing, long process. All right, what will happen? And many of you know about this. Duke University had everything suspended because of the non-compliance that wasn't being followed, because of the death of Jesse Gelsinger at Penn, on and on and on. Here are some of the institutions that have been suspended. Note, Michigan is not up there yet. And I have a Johns Hopkins letter just recently in September because I brought it because it cites the University of Michigan. Unfortunately, we had a large number of hospitals in the state of Michigan who were giving Hopkins research material, but they exempted the project when it turns out it was actually human subjects research. And we are cited throughout this 7-page document, and I have copies here if anyone is interested in seeing it. We are in the midst of trying to work out how to handle that problem. All right, what if I only do research on microorganisms? Do they have rights? Can I do research on the minds of federal regulators? Is it too late to switch professions? And should I listen to my mother and married money? Questions? Nope. I've scared you off from doing any research? Okay, that's it. Thanks.